Jake Morrison stood in the cargo bay of the Horizon's Edge, staring at the specimens lined up before him. He had been a xenobiologist for 8 years, but something about this mission felt wrong. The numbers didn't add up. 3 containers of biological samples had vanished from the inventory, and no one seemed willing to explain where they had gone. Commander Alan Price entered the bay with 2 others behind him. Linda Hayes, the navigation officer, and Greg Sullivan, the chief engineer. Their faces were hard, their eyes cold. Jake felt his stomach tighten. "You wanted to see me, Commander?" Jake asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Price stepped closer. "You've been digging into things that don't concern you, Morrison. Asking questions about missing supplies. About transmissions we never authorized." Jake's mouth went dry. He had found evidence 3 days ago, hidden deep in the ship's logs. They were selling alien specimens on the black market, making deals with smugglers, pocketing money that should have gone to the Research Foundation. He had planned to report it when they returned to base, but clearly, they had discovered his investigation. "I don't know what you're talking about," Jake lied, but his voice betrayed him. Price smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Bad liar, Morrison. Always were. That's going to be a problem." Before Jake could react, Sullivan raised a stun weapon and fired. The bolt hit Jake in the chest and his muscles seized. He collapsed to the floor, unable to move, unable to speak. His mind screamed, but his body refused to obey. They dragged him to an escape pod. Linda Hayes opened the hatch while Price and Sullivan lifted Jake's paralyzed body and shoved him inside. His head cracked against the metal interior, stars exploding across his vision. "Nothing personal," Price said, leaning into the pod. "But you're a liability now. Keather 7 is uncharted, untamed. If anyone asks, we'll say you took a pod to study the surface and never came back. Tragic accident, the hatch slammed shut." Jake heard the clamps release, felt the pod shudder as it separated from the ship. Then gravity took hold and he was falling. The pod screamed as it hit the atmosphere of Keather 7. Alarms blared from every direction. Jake's paralysis began to fade, feeling returning to his fingers and toes just in time for him to realize how much danger he was in. The heat shield was buckling. The trajectory was wrong. This pod was never meant for a safe landing. He dragged himself to the control panel, fingers fumbling with the straps. The harness clicked into place seconds before the pod slammed into something solid. The impact threw him forward, the straps cutting into his chest and shoulders. Metal shrieked. Glass shattered. Then everything went still. Jake hung in the harness, breathing hard, tasting blood. His left arm throbbed. His ribs ached with every breath. But he was alive. He released the harness and fell to the floor of the pod. The hatch was jammed, but after several kicks it burst open. Hot, humid air rushed in, thick with the smell of vegetation and something else, something that smelled like rot and danger. Jake crawled out into a jungle unlike anything he had seen before. Trees rose hundreds of feet into the air, their trunks as wide as houses. Vines hung like curtains between them, some covered in thorns as long as his hand. The canopy above blocked most of the sunlight, leaving the forest floor in perpetual twilight. Strange sounds echoed through the trees, clicks and hisses, growls that made his skin crawl. He stumbled back to the pod and searched for supplies. The emergency pack was intact. Inside he found a week's worth of rations, a survival knife, a medical kit, a malfunctioning communicator, and a plasma pistol with 3 charges. 3 shots. That was all he had to defend himself on a world where everything wanted to kill him. Jake activated the communicator, but static was all he got. Price had probably disabled the emergency beacon before jettisoning the pod. No one was coming to save him. The first night, Jake climbed a tree and tried to sleep in the branches. He didn't succeed. The jungle came alive after dark. Things moved through the undergrowth below, large things that breathed in deep, rattling gasps, eyes reflected in the darkness, watching him. Waiting. On the second day, Jake found water. A stream cutting through the jungle, clear and cold. He filled his canteen and kept moving, knowing that staying in one place meant death. His body ached. His arm had swollen from the crash, but he pushed forward. That afternoon he heard the sound, a roar that shook the trees. Not the roar of an animal, but something deeper, something that resonated in his chest and made his bones vibrate. Jake froze, every instinct screaming at him to run. But before he could move, he heard something else. Whimpering. Jake crept forward, knife in hand, following the sound. He pushed through a wall of ferns and stopped dead. The creature before him was massive, 12 feet tall, standing on 4 legs as thick as tree trunks. Its body was covered in scales that shimmered between midnight blue and black like oil on water. 6 eyes ringed its elongated head, each one the size of Jake's fist. Its mouth hung open, revealing rows of crystalline teeth that could tear through steel. A voidstalker. He had read about them in the ship's database. Apex predators, pack hunters, intelligent and absolutely lethal. This one was trapped. A massive metal snare left by some hunter or perhaps another expedition had closed around its rear leg. The metal teeth had bitten deep into the flesh and the wound was infected. Green pus oozed from the cuts. The creature had thrashed so hard that it had torn muscle and possibly broken bone. Other predators circled in the shadows beyond. Jake could see their shapes moving between the trees. They smelled the blood. They were waiting for the voidstalker to weaken enough to make it an easy kill. The creature's 6 eyes locked onto Jake. It growled, a deep rumble that he felt in his chest. This was a creature that could kill him with one snap of its jaws. Every survival instinct Jake had told him to run, to leave it to its fate, to save himself. But Jake had spent his entire adult life studying animal behavior. He had worked with predators before, studied their psychology, learned their patterns, and as he looked into those 6 eyes, he saw something that changed everything. Intelligence, pain, and something else. A plea. Jake raised his hand slowly, showing he was unarmed. The knife was still in his belt. The plasma pistol was in his pack. He could have taken a shot, put the creature out of its misery. Instead, he spoke. "Easy," he said, his voice low and calm. "I'm not going to hurt you." The voidstalker watched him, its massive head tilted slightly to one side. Jake took a step forward. The creature growled again, but it didn't lunge. It was too weak or perhaps too curious. Jake spent the next hour working. He approached slowly, talking the entire time, letting the creature get used to his voice, his presence. When he finally reached the snare, the voidstalker's breathing had calmed. It watched him with those 6 eyes, tracking every movement. Jake pulled out his knife and began cutting away the infected flesh around the wound. The creature flinched but held still. He poured water over the injury, washing away the pus and dirt. Then he used strips from his shirt to bandage it as best he could. The snare itself was harder. The metal was designed to hold creatures far stronger than Jake. He couldn't cut through it, but he could work the mechanism, find the release hidden beneath layers of corrosion. It took another hour, but finally, the jaws of the trap opened. The voidstalker pulled its leg free and stood, testing the limb. It was still injured, still limping, but it could move. The creature turned those 6 eyes back to Jake, studying him with an intensity that made him feel like he was being measured, evaluated, judged. Then it turned and limped away into the jungle, disappearing into the shadows. Jake stood there, alone again, his hands shaking from adrenaline. He had just saved the life of one of the deadliest predators on the planet. He didn't know if that made him brave or stupid. He would find out soon enough. Jake made camp that night in a hollow tree, using branches and leaves to hide the entrance. He ate half a ration bar and drank sparingly from his canteen. Tomorrow he would need to find more water, more food. He would need to figure out how to survive in this nightmare. But as he drifted off to sleep, exhausted and aching, a sound reached his ears. A low melodic call that echoed through the jungle. It sounded almost like a song, and somehow Jake knew it was meant for him. Jake woke to the sound of something heavy moving outside his shelter. His hand went to the plasma pistol, fingers wrapping around the grip. The entrance to his hollow tree was blocked by something large. He held his breath and waited. Dawnlight filtered through the gaps in the branches. Jake could see a massive shape silhouetted against the entrance. 4 legs, a long tail, 6 eyes that glowed faintly in the dim light. The voidstalker from yesterday. Jake's grip on the pistol loosened. The creature wasn't attacking. It was just sitting there watching. Then it moved aside, and Jake saw what it had brought. A dead animal lay at the entrance. It was roughly the size of a large dog with thick fur and sharp horns. Fresh kill. Still warm. The voidstalker made a low chirping sound, almost gentle, and pushed the carcass closer with one massive paw. Jake stared in disbelief. It was an offering. A gift. He crawled out of the shelter slowly, keeping his movements calm and predictable. The voidstalker watched him but didn't retreat. Up close in the morning light, Jake could see the creature more clearly. Its scales weren't just blue. They held hints of purple and green, colors that shifted as it moved. The bandage he had tied around its leg was still in place, dark with dried blood but holding. "You came back," Jake said quietly. The creature tilted its head, those 6 eyes blinking in sequence. Jake had the distinct impression it understood him. Not the words, perhaps, but the tone, the intent. Jake used his knife to cut meat from the carcass. He ate slowly, watching the voidstalker the entire time. The creature settled onto its haunches, its injured legs stretched out to the side. It watched him eat with what almost seemed like satisfaction. When Jake was finished, he approached the creature again. This time he held out a piece of meat. The voidstalker leaned forward and took it delicately from his hand, its crystalline teeth clicking together as it chewed. "I'm going to call you Midnight," Jake said, "because you're dark as midnight and you saved my life by bringing me food." Midnight made a rumbling sound deep in its chest. Not a growl, more like a purr, if a creature this size could purr. Over the next 2 weeks, a routine formed. Midnight would hunt, bringing Jake food that he couldn't catch himself. In return, Jake tended to Midnight's wound, changing the bandage daily, using plants he recognized from his xenobiology training to prevent infection. He made a paste from bark that had antiseptic properties. He found leaves that reduced inflammation, but it was more than just a transaction. They were learning to communicate. Midnight had a vocabulary of sounds, each one meaning something different. A sharp bark meant danger. A low whistle meant come here. A series of clicks meant stay quiet. Jake learned them all, and Midnight learned his words. Sit, stay, go, hunt, home. Jake realized that voidstalkers were far more intelligent than the ship's database had suggested. Midnight could understand complex ideas. When Jake drew a map in the dirt showing where he wanted to go, Midnight studied it and then led him there. When Jake needed a specific type of plant, he could describe it, and Midnight would search until it found something similar. They became partners. And then something changed. On the 15th day, 3 more voidstalkers appeared. Jake was collecting water from the stream when he heard Midnight's warning bark. He turned to see 3 creatures emerging from the jungle. They were smaller than Midnight, younger but still massive and dangerous. Their scales were lighter, ranging from silver blue to deep gray. Midnight positioned itself between Jake and the newcomers, its body tense, ready to fight. The 3 young stalkers circled, their eyes fixed on Jake. They were testing him, evaluating him, trying to understand what he was and why Midnight protected him. Jake understood. This was Midnight's pack. These were its subordinates, its family, and they wanted to know if Jake was prey, threat, or something else entirely. He stood still, making himself appear larger but not aggressive. He met each stalker's gaze for a moment, then looked away. In the animal kingdom, prolonged eye contact was a challenge. Breaking eye contact was respect. The largest of the 3, a female with silver streaks across her scales, approached first. She sniffed at Jake, her breath hot and smelling of meat. Her teeth were inches from his face. Jake didn't flinch. She made a low sound, almost questioning. Midnight answered with a series of chirps and clicks. Jake didn't know what they were saying, but he could guess. Midnight was vouching for him, explaining that he was part of the pack now. The female stalker pulled back and sat down. The other 2 followed her lead. It was acceptance. Cautious and conditional, but acceptance nonetheless. Jake spent the next week earning their trust. He shared his food, though it meant going hungry some nights. He helped them hunt, using his knowledge of tactics and animal behavior to drive prey into their ambushes. He showed them tools he had made from materials in the jungle, a spear, a sling, a trap. The voidstalkers were fascinated by the tools. They watched Jake use them, tried to mimic his actions with their paws and tails. They couldn't hold a spear, but they learned the concept. They understood that tools extended their capabilities, made them more effective hunters. Jake named the other 3. Silver, the female with the streaked scales. Ember, a male with scales that held reddish tints. Shadow, the smallest and quickest of the group, whose scales were so dark they seemed to absorb light. Together they dominated their territory. Other predators learned to avoid them. The pack that had once been 4 voidstalkers and a human became the most feared force in their section of jungle. But their success attracted attention. A rival pack of voidstalkers, 7 strong and led by a massive male covered in scars, challenged them for territory. Jake woke one morning to find the rival pack on the ridge above their camp, roaring their challenge. Midnight answered with a roar that shook the trees. The rivals descended and battle was inevitable. Jake's pack was outnumbered, but they had something the rivals didn't. They had strategy. Jake had spent weeks studying voidstalker behavior, learning their strengths and weaknesses. They were powerful but predictable. They relied on brute force and intimidation. They fought as individuals, not as a coordinated unit. Jake's pack fought differently. He positioned Silver and Shadow on the flanks, using the terrain to their advantage. Ember took the center with Midnight, drawing the enemy's attention. Jake himself climbed into the trees, using his sling to throw rocks at the rival pack's leader, distracting him at critical moments. The battle was brutal. Claws tore through scales. Teeth found flesh. Blood soaked the jungle floor, but Jake's tactics worked. The rival pack's leader, confused and frustrated by attacks from multiple directions, made a mistake. He left his flank exposed while focusing on Midnight. Shadow darted in and tore a deep gash across the leader's rear leg. The big male stumbled, and Midnight was on him instantly, jaws closing around his throat. Not killing, but dominating, forcing submission. The rival pack's leader went still. It was over. Midnight released him, and the rival leader limped away, his pack following. They had been defeated, their challenge answered. They wouldn't return. Jake's pack had won, but the victory came with a cost. Ember was injured, a deep cut across his shoulder. Silver had lost a tooth. Shadow was limping. Jake himself had fallen from a tree during the fight and bruised his ribs badly. But something important had happened during that battle. After the fight, when Jake was tending to Ember's wound, the 3 younger stalkers approached him. One by one, they lowered their massive heads and touched their foreheads to the ground in front of him. It was a gesture Jake had seen Midnight make to the pack leader before it had been injured. A sign of submission, of respect, of loyalty. They weren't just accepting Jake as part of the pack anymore. They were accepting him as a leader. Midnight watched from a distance, its 6 eyes gleaming with what Jake could only interpret as approval. The creature had been testing him all along, preparing him for this moment. It had brought him into the pack, taught him their ways, given him opportunities to prove himself. Jake Morrison, who had been betrayed and left to die, was now the alpha of a void stalker pack. He stood among the creatures, his hand resting on Midnight's massive head, and looked out at the jungle that had tried so hard to kill him. He had survived. More than that, he had thrived, but this was just the beginning. That night, as the pack rested and recovered from the battle, Jake heard sounds in the distance. Not animal sounds. Something else. Engines, machinery, human voices. He wasn't alone on this planet. There were others. And if they were survivors like him, they would need help. If they were smugglers or worse, they would need to be dealt with. Jake looked at his pack, at the 4 powerful predators who had accepted him as one of their own. He had learned to survive in the jungle. He had learned to lead. Now it was time to build something bigger. The sound of human voices changed everything. Jake had been alone in the jungle for almost 2 months, and part of him had accepted that this was his life now. But hearing those voices, hearing people speaking his language, stirred something in him he thought he had buried. Hope. He tracked the sounds for 3 days, moving carefully through the jungle with Midnight and the pack. They found the source on the 4th day, a crashed escape pod similar to the one Jake had arrived in, partially buried in mud near a swamp. The pod was empty, but there were signs of recent activity, footprints, a makeshift camp, evidence that someone had survived the crash. Jake followed the trail. The tracks led deeper into the swamp, into territory that even the voidstalkers avoided. The water here was dark and still, filled with things that could swallow a human whole. Jake found more evidence as he went. Torn fabric, drops of blood, signs of a struggle. Then he heard the screaming. Jake ran toward the sound, the pack bounding beside him. They broke through a wall of reeds and found her. A woman, red hair matted with mud and blood, was backed against a fallen tree. 3 creatures surrounded her, each one the size of a bear, with armored hides and jaws that dripped with venom. Swamp hunters. Ambush predators that lurked in the water and dragged prey down to drown. The woman had a broken piece of metal in her hand, using it like a club to keep the creatures at bay. But she was injured, her left leg bleeding badly, and it was only a matter of time before they overwhelmed her. Jake didn't hesitate. He raised his hand and gave the signal. Attack. Midnight and the pack exploded into motion. They hit the swamp hunters like a storm, claws and teeth finding purchase in armored hide. The swamp hunters were tough, but they weren't prepared for voidstalkers. Within minutes, 2 of them were dead, and the 3rd fled back into the water. Jake rushed to the woman's side. She stared at him in shock, then at the voidstalkers, then back at him. "You're real," she whispered. "I thought the fever was making me see things. The story's about a human who runs with monsters." "They're not monsters," Jake said, examining her leg. "The wound was deep, infected, and I don't run with them. Can you walk?" "Lisa," she said. "My name is Lisa Carter, combat medic, and no, I don't think I can walk." Jake lifted her carefully, trying not to jar the injured leg. Midnight moved close, and Jake understood what the creature was offering. He helped Lisa onto Midnight's back, positioning her so she could hold on to the creature's thick neck. Lisa tensed, every muscle in her body going rigid with fear. "It's okay," Jake said. "Midnight won't hurt you. Trust me." They made their way back to camp slowly. Lisa passed out twice from pain, but Jake kept her stable. When they arrived, he laid her out in his shelter and began treating the wound. He used the antiseptic paste he had developed, cleaned the infection and stitched the gash closed using thread he had made from plant fibers. Lisa woke 3 days later. She found herself surrounded by void stalkers with Jake sitting nearby sharpening a spear. "I'm not dead," she said, sounding surprised. "No," Jake agreed. "You're not. How do you feel?" "Like I got chewed up and spit out, but alive." She looked at the stalkers, then at Jake. "How is this possible? These things are supposed to be mindless killers." "They're not mindless. They're intelligent. They understand cooperation, loyalty, strategy. They're survivors just like us." Jake handed her a water container. "What happened to you?" "Why are you here?" Lisa's expression darkened. "Same as you, I'm guessing. Someone on my ship decided I knew too much. Commander Price and his crew have been running this scam across 3 systems. I found evidence and they threw me out an airlock in an escape pod. Left me to die." "Price," Jake said, the name like acid on his tongue. "He's the one who did this to me too." "Then we have something in common." Lisa struggled to sit up. "So what now? We survive, we thrive, we build a life in hell?" "Something like that," Lisa stayed. Over the next week, she recovered her strength, and in doing so, she became part of the pack. She bonded with Shadow, the smallest and quickest of the stalkers. The creature seemed drawn to her, perhaps sensing her pain, her determination to survive. Lisa brought skills Jake didn't have. She was trained in combat, knew how to fight, how to build defensive positions. She taught Jake and the pack new tactics, ways to coordinate that made them even more effective. Together, they expanded their territory, driving out rival predators and claiming the best hunting grounds. But Lisa wasn't the last survivor they found. Over the next 3 months, more escape pods fell from the sky. Danny Foster, a pilot with a talent for engineering, crashed 10 miles from their camp. Claire Martinez, a botanist who understood plants in ways Jake never could. Kyle Turner, a former soldier who had crossed the wrong people. Each had been betrayed, cast out, left to die. Jake and Lisa found them all. They brought them back to camp, treated their wounds, taught them how to survive, and each one bonded with a void stalker. The pack grew. More stalkers came from the deep jungle, drawn by stories of the strange pack that welcomed humans. Some came out of curiosity, others came seeking safety, having been driven from their territories by larger packs. Jake welcomed them all, but he made the rules clear. No killing within the pack. Share the food. Protect each other. Work together. It worked better than he had any right to expect. The humans brought innovation. Danny built tools from salvaged metal and jungle materials. Claire cultivated gardens using alien plants that were safe to eat. Kyle trained combat groups, teaching both humans and stalkers to fight as a unified force. The stalkers brought strength, speed, and instincts that kept everyone alive. They hunted with terrifying efficiency. They sensed danger before it arrived. They fought with a ferocity that made other predators think twice about attacking. Together, they became something new. Not a human settlement, not a stalker pack, something in between. A tribe. Jake's tribe grew to 30 humans and 50 void stalkers. They built a village in a defensible valley. using wood from the jungle and metal from crashed pods. They erected walls to keep out the worst predators. They built watchtowers where guards could watch for threats. They dug wells and created a water system. They developed their own culture, a blend of human creativity and stalker instinct. They held councils where both species had a voice. They created laws that applied to everyone. They celebrated victories together and mourned losses as one. Jake led them, but he didn't rule them. He listened to advice, took suggestions, made decisions based on what was best for everyone. Lisa became his second, the one who carried out his orders and offered counsel when he needed it. Together they guided the tribe through challenges that would have destroyed a lesser group, but their success attracted attention from something far more dangerous than jungle predators. It started with strange lights in the mountains, beams that cut through the night sky scanning the jungle. Then came the sounds. Mechanical hums, the whine of engines, the click and whir of something that wasn't organic. Danny was the first to see them. He was out on a scouting mission with his bonded stalker, a massive male named Storm, when they encountered the machines. They were 20 feet tall, walking on 4 articulated legs, their bodies made of black metal covered in strange symbols. Weapons bristled from their frames, and inside each machine, visible through a transparent cockpit, were creatures unlike anything the humans had seen before. Insectoid beings, 10 feet tall, with chitinous armor and multiple limbs. Their faces were alien, unreadable, but their intent was clear. One of the machines fired without warning. The blast of energy vaporized a tree next to Danny, and he ran. Storm ran with him, both fleeing back to the village as fast as they could move. They made it back barely, and Danny told Jake what he had seen. "They're not animals," Danny said, still shaking from adrenaline. "They're intelligent. They have technology, and I think they've been watching us." That night the machines came. 3 of them descended from the mountains, their weapons glowing in the darkness. They didn't approach the village. They didn't make demands. They simply opened fire. The first blast hit the outer wall, blowing a hole through it. The second ignited one of the storage buildings. The third would have killed a group of sleeping stalkers, but Midnight sensed the danger and moved them just in time. Jake rallied the tribe. Humans grabbed weapons. Stalkers formed defensive lines. Together they fought back, but they were outmatched. The machines were powerful, their armor thick, their weapons devastating. For every bit of damage the tribe inflicted, the machines seemed to shrug it off. After an hour, the machines withdrew. They had killed 3 humans and 7 stalkers. They had destroyed a quarter of the village. And they had delivered their message. This was a warning. Leave this place. Abandon what you've built. Or face extermination. Jake stood in the ruins of his village, surrounded by his people, surrounded by his pack. They looked to him for guidance, for answers, for hope. He thought about running. About fleeing deeper into the jungle, finding somewhere to hide. But he knew it wouldn't work. These machines, these beings, they had technology. They could track the tribe anywhere. "We don't run," Jake said, his voice carrying through the burned and broken village. "We've built something here. We've created a home, a life. We're not giving that up. We fight." Lisa stepped beside him. Jake stood on the valley rim, looking down at the village below. In the 3 weeks since the first attack, they had rebuilt what they could and fortified what remained. Walls were thicker now. Watchtowers were taller. Every person, human and stalker alike, knew their position for when the next attack came. Because there would be a next attack. Jake was certain of it. Lisa joined him on the rim, Shadow moving silently beside her. The stalker had become her constant companion, as inseparable from her as Midnight was from Jake. "Danny thinks he can build weapons from the salvage," Lisa said. "Real weapons, not just spears and slings. He found intact power cells in one of the crashed pods. If he can modify them, we might have something that can hurt those machines." "How long?" Jake asked. 2 weeks, maybe 3. We don't have that long." As if to prove his point, the air split with a sound like thunder. Jake looked up to see lights descending from the mountains. "Not 3 machines this time. 7. "Sound the alarm," Jake said quietly. Lisa ran down the slope, Shadow racing ahead of her. Within seconds, bells were ringing throughout the village. Humans grabbed weapons and moved to defensive positions. Stalkers formed groups, each led by one of the original pack members. They had drilled for this moment, practiced until the movements were instinct. The machines reached the valley floor and spread out in a line. Jake could see the insectoid beings inside the cockpits, their alien faces impossible to read. One of the machines stepped forward. A voice boomed from it, mechanical and translated. "Humans, leave this place. You corrupt the natural order. The beast you command are animals meant to be controlled, not partnered with. You have 3 days to abandon this valley. After that, we will remove you." The machine turned and retreated with the others back toward the mountains. 3 days. Jake called a council that night. Every human and every stalker leader gathered in the main hall, a structure they had built from jungle wood and salvaged metal. Midnight sat beside Jake, its massive presence a reminder of how far they had all come. "They gave us an ultimatum," Jake said. 3 days to leave, or they come with everything they have. We need to decide what we do." Kyle spoke first. "We can't fight 7 of those machines. Not with what we have. We barely survived 3. "We don't fight them in the open," Lisa countered. "We use the jungle. We use tactics. We make them come to us on our terms." Danny raised his hand. "I can have basic weapons ready in 2 days if I push hard. Nothing fancy, but enough to maybe penetrate their armor at close range." Claire added, "I've been studying the local plants. Some of them produce acid strong enough to eat through metal. If we can get close enough, we could disable their weapon systems." Jake listened to them all, ideas flowing, strategies forming. The tribe had faced challenges before, but nothing like this. These weren't animals or rival packs. These were an advanced species with technology and clear intent to destroy them. But as Jake looked around the room, at the faces of people who had been abandoned and left to die, at the stalkers who had accepted them as equals, he felt something solidify inside him. "We fight," Jake said. "Not because we want to, but because this is our home. We built it together. We're not giving it up." The room erupted in agreement, humans and stalkers together, voices and roars blending into a unified cry. The next 2 days were chaos. Danny worked day and night building weapons, crude energy rifles cobbled together from power cells and salvaged parts. They wouldn't last long, maybe a dozen shots each, but they could hurt the machines. Claire and her team harvested acid-producing plants, creating containers that could be thrown or delivered by stalker claws. Kyle trained strike teams focusing on mobility and hit-and-run tactics. Jake worked on strategy. He studied the terrain, looking for advantages. The valley was defensible, but it was also a trap if the machines surrounded them. They needed to control where the fight happened. He found the answer in the canyon north of the village. It was narrow, with steep walls on both sides and only one entrance wide enough for the machines to pass through. If Jake could lure them in there, his tribe could attack from above, using the high ground to their advantage. But it would require bait, something the machines wanted badly enough to commit their full force. Jake volunteered himself. "No," Lisa said flatly when he told her the plan. "It's suicide. It's necessary. They want us gone. If I present myself as their primary target, they'll focus on me. That's when the rest of you strike. And if you die," Jake looked at her steadily, "then you lead. You're ready for it. You've been ready for a while now." On the 3rd day, the machines came. All 7 descended from the mountains at dawn, moving in formation toward the village. Jake was waiting for them at the valley entrance, alone except for Midnight. The massive stalker stood beside him, radiating defiance. The lead machine stopped 20 feet away. The insectoid pilot's voice boomed through speakers. "You did not leave." "This is our home," Jake called back. "We're not abandoning it. Then you will be removed." The machines raised their weapons. Jake turned and ran. Midnight ran with him, both racing toward the canyon. Behind them, the machines opened fire. Energy blasts tore through the air, vaporizing trees and turning earth into glass. Jake dodged left, then right, using every bit of cover he could find. Midnight shielded him when necessary, its scales absorbing hits that would have killed Jake instantly. They reached the canyon entrance and plunged inside. The machines followed, their bulk making them slow but relentless. The canyon walls rose high on both sides, blocking most of the light, creating shadows where anything could hide. The machines spread out, searching. Jake led them deeper, always staying just out of reach. When they were fully committed, when all 7 machines were inside the canyon with no easy way out, Jake gave the signal. He fired his plasma pistol into the air, the last charge creating a bright flash. The canyon walls exploded. Danny had spent the last 2 days rigging charges throughout the canyon, using every explosive compound they could create or salvage. The detonations were massive, simultaneous, and devastating. Tons of rock came down, burying 3 of the machines instantly and damaging 2 others. Then the tribe attacked. Stalkers dropped from the canyon walls, claws extended, acid containers clutched in their powerful jaws. They swarmed the damaged machines, tearing at joints and weapon ports. Humans followed, firing Danny's makeshift rifles at weak points Kyle had identified. The weapons worked. Energy bolts punched through armor, destroying internal systems. The battle was brutal and chaotic. One machine managed to fire before it was overwhelmed, the blast killing 4 stalkers and 2 humans. Another crushed a stalker under its metal foot before Lisa and Shadow brought it down, Shadow tearing through cables while Lisa poured acid into the cockpit. Jake and Midnight fought side by side, working as one. When a machine targeted Jake, Midnight was there to intercept. When Midnight was pinned under debris, Jake was there to help free it. They moved like parts of the same organism, each anticipating the other's needs. The fight lasted 6 hours. When it ended, all 7 machines lay broken and burning in the canyon. But the cost was severe. 14 humans dead. 31 stalkers dead. The survivors were exhausted, wounded, covered in blood and burns. Jake walked among them, offering what comfort he could, knowing that many were hurt beyond his ability to help. Lisa found him at the canyon entrance. Staring at the wreckage, "We won," she said quietly. "Did we?" Jake gestured to the bodies being carried out. "Look at the price. The price of survival is always high. But we're still here. The village is still standing. We proved that we're not victims anymore." Jake wanted to argue, but he couldn't. She was right. They had faced an enemy with superior technology and won through courage, ingenuity, and unity. The tribe had earned its place on this world, but the war wasn't over. 2 days later, more machines appeared. Not attacking this time, just watching from a distance. Jake realized they were regrouping, reassessing. The insectoid beings had underestimated the tribe once. They wouldn't make that mistake again. Jake called another council. The tribe was battered, grieving, but still defiant. "They'll come again," Jake said. "With more machines, better tactics. We hurt them, but we didn't break them. We need to decide if we keep fighting or if we try to negotiate." Kyle shook his head. "They don't want negotiation. They want us gone. Then we change their minds," Lisa said. "We make the cost of removing us too high. We make them realize that we're not invaders, we're residents. We belong here as much as they do." Danny looked up from the weapon he was repairing. "I can build bigger bombs, better weapons. If they want a war, we can give them one." Jake looked around the room at faces hardened by loss and survival. He looked at the stalkers at Midnight sitting beside him, patient and loyal. He thought about everything they had built, everything they had sacrificed. "Then we fight," Jake said. "But we fight smart. We make them come to us. We use the jungle, use our knowledge of this world. We show them that we're not just survivors. We're warriors." The tribe roared its agreement, human voices and stalker calls blending together in a sound that echoed through the valley and beyond. A declaration to the mountains and everything that lived there. They were not leaving. They were not surrendering. The war lasted 3 months, but it felt like years. The insectoid beings, whom the tribe began calling the architects for the ancient ruins they left throughout the mountains, attacked with increasing frequency and sophistication. They learned from each defeat, adapted their tactics, modified their machines, but so did the tribe. Jake's people became ghosts in the jungle. They struck from shadows, disappeared before retaliation could come, hit supply lines and communication towers. The stalkers used their natural camouflage and speed to devastating effect. The humans used their creativity to turn the jungle itself into a weapon. Danny built traps that could bring down machines twice the size of the first ones. Claire developed poisons that corroded metal and disrupted the architect's technology. Kyle trained warriors who could move through the jungle without leaving a trace, strike with precision, and vanish into the undergrowth. But it was Jake's leadership that held everything together. He fought on the front lines, always visible, always present. When supplies ran low, he went hungry so others could eat. When morale faltered, he reminded them of why they fought. He made decisions that saved lives and decisions that cost them, and he carried the weight of every loss. Lisa was beside him through all of it. They became more than just commanders. They became partners in every sense. bound by shared struggle and unwavering trust. The tribe saw them as two halves of a whole, human and human leading both humans and stalkers toward something greater than survival. The turning point came at what would later be called the Battle of Broken Ridge. The architects committed everything to one massive assault. 300 war machines, the largest force ever assembled on Keather 7, marched on the tribe's valley. Their intent was clear: total extermination. Jake knew they couldn't win a straight fight, so he didn't try. For weeks, the tribe had been preparing the canyon network north of the valley. They had rigged it with explosives, carved false paths, created ambush points at every turn. They had studied the machines, learned their blind spots, identified their weaknesses. When the architect army arrived, Jake met them at the valley entrance with a small force. Midnight, Lisa, Shadow, and 20 of the tribe's best warriors. It looked like a last stand, a desperate defense of a doomed position. The architects took the bait. They pressed forward, confident in their overwhelming numbers. Jake's small force retreated slowly, making the architects work for every inch, drawing them deeper into the canyon network. The walls grew taller. The paths grew narrower. The machines began to bunch together, their formations compressing in the confined space. When the architect vanguard reached the deepest point of the canyon, Jake gave the signal. Not with his voice or a weapon. He gave it through Midnight, who let out a roar that every stalker in the tribe knew. Now, the canyon walls exploded. Not in one place, but in dozens. Danny had placed charges throughout the entire network, each one timed to create a cascading collapse. Millions of tons of rock came down, burying the majority of the architect force in seconds. The survivors, trapped between fallen sections of canyon and the tribe's prepared ambush points, fought desperately. But they were disorganized, confused, cut off from support. The tribe attacked from above and below, from hidden tunnels and concealed positions. Stalkers used their speed and strength. Humans used their weapons and tactics. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it ended, the architect army was destroyed. Jake walked through the aftermath, numb with exhaustion and grief. They had won, but the cost was staggering. 14 more humans dead, 31 stalkers lost. The tribe that had started with hope and determination had been forged in fire and blood, but they had done what everyone said was impossible. They had defeated a technologically superior enemy through courage, cunning, and unity. 3 days after Broken Ridge, the architects sent emissaries. They came without weapons, their machines unarmed, their posture non-threatening. Jake met them in neutral territory, flanked by Lisa, Midnight, and Shadow. The lead architect, a massive being covered in ceremonial markings, spoke through a translation device. "You have proven your strength. You have earned the right to exist. We propose peace." Jake studied the alien, searching for deception. "What kind of peace?" "Territory. You keep the jungle lands. We keep the mountains. No further conflict unless one side breaks the agreement. Your tribe becomes recognized as a legitimate civilization, with all the rights that entails. And if we refuse, then the war continues until one of us is extinct. We have lost much. So have you. Neither of us wants this." Jake looked at Lisa. She nodded slightly. He looked at Midnight, at Shadow, at the tribe members standing behind him. They had fought so hard, sacrificed so much. They deserved peace. "We accept," Jake said. The treaty was formalized over the following weeks. Borders were established. Communication protocols were set. The architects acknowledged the tribe as equals, as people rather than animals or invaders. It wasn't perfect and tensions remained, but it was peace. The tribe began to rebuild, not just repairing what had been damaged, but expanding, growing, evolving. More humans arrived, survivors of other betrayals, other abandonments. Word had spread through smuggler networks and black market channels about a place where the unwanted could find purpose. More stalkers came too, drawn by stories of the pack that welcomed all. Some came from distant territories. Others came from packs that had rejected them. Jake welcomed them all, but he never lowered his standards. Respect, cooperation, unity. Those were the prices of admission. Within 2 years, the tribe had grown to over 200 humans and 300 stalkers. They built cities in the jungle, structures that blended human architecture with stalker aesthetics. They developed agriculture, using Claire's knowledge to cultivate crops that could feed both species. They created art, music, stories that celebrated their shared culture. They became something unprecedented, not human, not stalker. Both and neither. A hybrid civilization that proved different species could coexist, could thrive together. 5 years after Jake's betrayal and abandonment, a ship arrived from human space. It was a diplomatic vessel, sent to investigate reports of survivors on Keather 7. The crew expected to find refugees desperate for rescue. Instead, they found cities. They found farms and workshops and schools. They found humans and aliens working side by side, building something that challenged everything they thought they knew about interspecies relationships. The ship's captain, a stern woman named Victoria Hall, requested a meeting with the tribe's leader. She was escorted to the central village by stalker guards and human guides, her eyes wide with disbelief at everything she saw. Jake met her in the council hall, Midnight beside him, Lisa on his other side. The captain stared at the massive predator, at the casual way Jake rested his hand on its scaled head, at the obvious bond between them. "You're Jake Morrison," Captain Hall said, "the xenobiologist who was reported lost 5 years ago." "I was reported dead," Jake corrected, "left to die by Commander Price and his crew. But I survived. We all did. We arrested Price and his accomplices 8 months ago. They're awaiting trial for smuggling, conspiracy, and attempted murder. Your testimony could help ensure they never see freedom again. Good, they deserve whatever they get. But that's not why you're here." Captain Hall nodded. "We're offering rescue. Passage back to human space for any survivors who want it. Medical care, compensation, support. You've all been through hell. Let us help." Jake looked around the hall, at the humans and stalkers who had become his family, at the civilization they had built from nothing, at the future they were creating together. "Thank you," Jake said. "But we're not going anywhere. This is our home. You're choosing to stay on this death world with these creatures?" "These creatures are my people," Jake said firmly. "Same as the humans. We've built something here that matters, something that shows the galaxy what's possible when different species choose understanding over fear, cooperation over conflict. I'm not abandoning that." Captain Hall was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "What about an embassy? A permanent diplomatic presence? Keather 7 could join the galactic community as an independent world. You'd have protection, trade opportunities, recognition." Jake looked at Lisa. She smiled and nodded. He looked at Midnight, at the other stalkers in the hall, reading their body language. They trusted him to make this decision. "We'll accept an embassy," Jake said, "but we govern ourselves. Human and stalker together. No interference from outside." Agreed. The news of Keather 7 spread through human space like wildfire. A world where humans and apex predators had formed a civilization. Where the betrayed and abandoned had built something extraordinary. Where interspecies cooperation wasn't just theory but reality. Some called Jake a visionary. Others called him crazy. The stalkers called him Alpha, leader, family. Jake didn't care about the labels. He cared about the tribe, about the people and creatures who had trusted him, followed him, built alongside him. Years passed. The tribe continued to grow. Children were born. Human children who grew up alongside young stalkers, learning to see each other as equals rather than aliens. The older generation, those who remembered the betrayals and the war, began to step back, letting the younger ones take leadership roles. Jake trained them all,